Why I believe the most destructive institution in modern day society are universities. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of people angry. I'm going to get a lot of comments. But you have to listen through to what I say and really examine what I will be saying in this video. The reoccurring theme in all my videos is the world is basically the exact opposite of what you think it is. Now, I'm 65 years old, and I've been through a lot in my life, but I'm the sort of individual that doesn't look at the end result. I don't look at how things are presented to me by society. I look at the individual facts and what I've discovered. And it's quite shocking, It's extremely shocking and extremely depressing at times. But, with universities, I was a straight A honor student. I was supposed to become a surgeon. And in high school, I was looking so forward to entering university where, I would be enriched, I'd be enlightened, I would be into this intellectual heaven. And I found virtually the exact opposite. And it was a real shock for me because when I entered university, with my experience, I found that the average person in university was not as intelligent as the average person in high school. And people would say to me, well, how could that be? This is university, they have all these high standards. Well, there's a big difference between studying 24 hours a day and writing tests and having natural intelligence. And I found so many people in university had a chip on their shoulder. They weren't very bright at all. So they had to study like mad. And in high school, I had a couple friends who were exactly like this, where family pressure, expectations, is they had to go to university. Otherwise, they'd be an embarrassment to the family. And, a couple of these guys, could never go skiing. They could never play tennis. They couldn't go to movies with us. They literally were studying 7 days a week, virtually 24 hours a day. Now, they were very nice guys, and, they were my friends, but, they weren't very bright at all. And, they made it in university. And, I think they not only had to prove to their family and friends that they could do it, but they really had to prove it to themselves. And, I did 2 years in university, and I was going to continue on into med school, but I thought before I go down that journey, because it's a long journey, a lot of years to become a specialist in medicine. So I went and talked to 2 surgeons, and they actually talked me out of doing it because they said they did not like their jobs at all. Perhaps if I talked to 2 other surgeons, I'd be a surgeon today. But anyways, then I thought, okay, what am I going to do? So I thought, let's get a BCom and let's go into the business world. I had a professor who I really admired, and I was very close to him. And at the end of every one of his lectures, he would say, of course, boys and girls, this is all theoretical and can never be applied to the outside business world because there's too many variables. So one day, after classes, I was in his office and we were talking, and I said, what do you mean by this? And he then opened up to me. And at one point, he almost started crying. He said, I've spent my life not only teaching people useless information, but actually destroying their minds. And he said to me that if I stayed in university and got my BCom, and heaven forbid if I ever got my MBA, and if I tried to apply what he was teaching, he says you would destroy or hurt any business that you are involved in. And he said, we take clear thinking minds like yours, and we fill them full of garbage and make things very complex. So, he actually, and this is a professor, a doctor, he urged me to quit university. And he said, you have a great, great mind. Leave university before we destroy it. And then he said, university is good for people who aren't that bright, that need that certification that gives them the entry point into a job. And, much to my parents' shock and dismay, I quit. The dean of the university called me into his office and said, "What are you doing? You can do anything you want with your life." And I have to admit, I rebelled somewhat because I always had this artistic side of me, and I was never allowed to explore it. No, you got to take physics, you have to take science, you have to take mathematics. So I rebelled, and I quit university. I became self-employed. I followed my passion, and I've never been happier. Now, being self-employed and in the business world, I have encountered so much that confirms what I experienced in university. I will go back to when I was in grade 7 as well, to the old system in Canada. I don't know what it was like in the US, but in Canada, back in the 50s and 60s, in grade 7, everybody was given an IQ test. And if you had a certain IQ or higher, you were allowed to go into the academics in high school, and you were allowed to go into university. If you had a certain IQ or lower, you had to go into the trades in high school. Now, the structure we had in the school system in Canada at that time was that we had incredible machine shops, we had automotive shops. As a matter of fact, one of the high schools I was in, they used to buy a lot every year and build a house from scratch. And, the students that were going to be carpenters would do all the woodwork on the house, the plumbers, electricians, etc. And in that system, when you actually graduated high school in Canada, you were a journeyman, and you could go right into a trade. And let's say in today's money, you were paid $45 an hour. Now, there was a revolt against this by the parents, like, my little Johnny, even though he doesn't have a high IQ, should not be excluded from going on to the academics. It's not fair. So, the system was changed, and it actually changed the year that I took the IQ test, because my whole age group took the IQ test, but then it was immediately abolished. And we could do whatever we wanted in high school. Now, another reason why I say universities are so destructive is that, this in Canada opened up the universities to the masses. And around about the same time, you had a different influence happening in the US, and that was the Vietnam War. So when the Vietnam War was raging, one way to not be drafted was to go to university, and you had to have a certain mark to keep on going and be excluded from the draft. And most of the universities and professors were very liberal, and they were against the Vietnam War. So they took it upon them to protect the students. So in a matter of a few years, there was virtually no failure grades given in universities. The average mark in universities in the US went up dramatically. The universities expanded their enrollment dramatically, to basically protect these poor kids from going to Vietnam and being killed in, an insane war in hindsight. But even after the Vietnam War ended and the draft ended, they never went back to where they were before. So both in Canada and in the US, for different reasons, university became the new high school. Now, I brought up about the technical trades because I will look at it from an individual point. So here's a guy who, prior to the abolishment of this separation of academics and technical, he could become a car mechanic, could become a plumber, an electrician. And let's say right out of high school, in today's money, he probably got a job paying $40, $45 an hour. Now, because his parents said, this guy has the right to go to university, off he went to university. And he graduated with his coveted BCom. He applies for job after job after job after job after job, and he doesn't get the job he wants and the job that he thought was promised to him. And he ends up serving coffee at Starbucks. Barely above minimum wage. And I know a couple of individuals that are exactly like that. And they were bitter. They never got the dream job. They never got what they expected they were to get, because universities graduate too many people, and it's basically a printing press for certificates. So in a way, if you look at it, or not in a way, it's a fact, okay? He could have gone right out of high school, made $40, $45 an hour, but now because the system has been changed and his parents and his society is pushing a guy who's not that bright to get his university degree. So now he ends up not only paying all that money to go to university, could be in deep student debt, wasted 4 years getting basically a worthless degree that gets him nowhere in life, and now he's at Starbucks maybe making $15, $16, $17 an hour with no real future. And people have to realize that with society, and I talk about my generation, we have ruined the US and Canada because we pamper, we spoil our children. And we make them believe they can be whatever they want, even when they are not mentally capable of doing it. And that is what is destroying them. And I think one reason why we have so much depression in modern day society is that people aren't allowed to do what they're supposed to do. Everybody expects more from them. You got to achieve more. You have to have a better position. You have to make more money. And there's all this pressure put on them. Why can't we just let people do what they're best at without dumping all this pressure on them? Now, I will talk about another thing. I have a very good friend. He's my best friend. And I talk about him quite a bit because through him I have met a lot of very influential people, because he's very high up in corporate America in Silicon Valley. And he was up in Vancouver visiting, and we were having supper. And I don't know exactly how the topic was brought up, but university was brought up. And I actually said to him, I make the argument that your university degree is beyond useless, it's actually destructive. And of course, right away, it's defend, 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 right? And I call the universities basically a cult. And, I'm fascinated by human psychology, and I will be doing more videos about psychology and how it relates to everything in society. But basically, if you take a look at cults, everything in this world is basically a cult. High school has a cult culture. Corporate America has cults. Governments have cults. Religion has cults, obviously. And, it might not seem, obvious to you, but there is what I call the cult of university as well. So it's a self-reinforcing, repeating legend, I call it urban legend, where the people who get the university degrees, they're not going to degrade their degrees and their learning. As a matter of fact, they're going to say it's the best thing that ever happened to them. And they're going to tell their kids, you got to do it as well. So it's just passed on from one generation to another without anybody questioning whether it's worthwhile or not. So anyways, my friend was up for supper, and I said to him, I make the argument your degree is useless. And, he got defensive, and I said, well, let me ask you this. Tell me once and he'd at that point been in business in corporate America for probably 30 years. And I said to him, have you ever once in your office or in a board meeting sat back, reflected on what one of your professors said in university? Or did you ever reach for a textbook from your BCom business courses? And I could see the frustration in him. It's just, and I said, I know the answer, you know the answer. It's no. You haven't even spent 1 second reflecting on it. And then his instinct was to naturally defend it again. He said, well, it taught me discipline. And university people, when you hire them, they're the best people. They're hard workers, they're devoted. And I said, well, first of all, I didn't know him when he was in university, but I know people that did. And I said, come on. I know people that knew you, and you were a party animal, okay? You partied and you really enjoyed yourself. But you had the discipline to study, write the essays, and do the exams. And I make the argument to you that, yes, I agree, university people, when you hire them, are much better than people with just a high school education in general. So people look at the end result and go, aha, you see, university is a great thing. But you have to analyze what is behind it. And what is behind it is, if somebody's a deadbeat and lazy and doesn't give a damn, he's never going to make it to university because he doesn't study, he doesn't pass the tests. So what university is really a filter to separate the people who are hardworking and devoted and the people who are lazy and deadbeats, in a simplistic way. But guess what, people? Those people that are hard workers and driven, they were like that before they went to university. University did not create that in them. So people look at the end result of university and they say, aha, university did this. No. If somehow you could remove those people that have the drive and ambition to go to university and put them right into corporate America, they'd be the same exact employees as after university. The other thing too, people have to realize the history of universities. And in Europe, hundreds of years ago when universities started, universities were for people who already succeeded in life and now they wanted to enrich themselves. They wanted to study history, do arts, etc. And it was like a passion for them in their retirement, or, if they made a lot of money in the 20s and 30s, it's like, let's go to university and learn a different language. Follow whatever, course that I am passionate about. But somewhere along the way, things got twisted. So people looked at universities, and all these wealthy people were in universities and coming out of universities, and they went, aha, universities create wealth. They create this incredible mindset where you can go out and do miracles. But in reality, it was the exact opposite. You, with common sense, made your money first, and then you went to university to get enriched. That leads me to my career in business. And it was in the 80s when my accountant, who was with a very major accounting firm here in Vancouver, Canada, phoned me up and said, Ron, we got a letter through Revenue Canada a week and a half ago on your behalf saying that you owed roughly $15,000 in, I think it was around 1983, which is a slug of money back then. And I said, how could that be? He said, well, you should come in and see our, incredible accounting tax expert, because we've given him your file, and he's spent 10 hours contemplating the situation, and he says there's no way out. So anyways, I went to his office the next day. Beautiful, one of the most beautiful office buildings in Vancouver. This guy had a big corner office, very impressive, all his diplomas on the wall, and I was younger then, so I have to admit I was intimidated by men like him. Today, I'm not, because I know the reality of people like him. And, he sat back and said, I've contemplated 10 hours on this and there's no way out. You just got to cut a check for $15,000. And I said, well, explain it to me. Now, here I am. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a tax expert. And he explained it to me in a few minutes. And literally within 15 seconds, I said, well, what about this? Doesn't this apply? And he sat back and stroked his chin and went, very, very interesting viewpoint. I'll tell you what, I'll phone Revenue Canada and I'll let you know in a day or two. So anyways, the phone rang the next day. He says, yeah, I phoned Revenue Canada. I told him, and yeah, you don't owe a penny. Oh, and by the way, here's my bill. in the 1980s for $300 an hour for 10 hours of work, $3,000. Now I've seen this over and over. I could spend hours telling you how I've had similar conversations with lawyers and other so-called experts. And you could take somebody with no education, no knowledge in the field, but has common sense, and they could solve the problem. So these guys are examples of the destructiveness of university in that they get their degrees, they don't have common sense, they've studied their ass off to get the degree and get the position. And now they're given these positions of power where they are controlling and having major effects on people's lives, and they really don't know what they're doing. And we so highly regard the certification, oh my God, you got the university degree, that we don't question them. But I make the argument that probably 70% of so-called professionals are basically incompetent, I do have friends. I have a couple friends that are lawyers, but they happen to be extremely brilliant lawyers. I use them, and but you can see as a small businessman, you go to one lawyer and you explain a situation, and there's this blank expression because the guy really is not a deep thinker and can't comprehend or can't analyze what is happening. But then you go to somebody else and boom, this guy gets it right away. But that has nothing to do with the education. It has nothing to do with the diploma. And I wish there was a way that society could come up with a test for common sense, because that's what we need to test for, not IQ. Not that if you study 24/7. But here is a problem, comes out of nowhere, solve it. And the older I get, the more I see universities spiraling downhill. And, the cost of a university education is going through the roof. The debt that students have to take on. And universities have just become, especially in the United States, just profit centers. And, professors are getting outrageous salaries. All the administrators are making a fortune. I read somewhere at some Ivy League university, forget which one it is, but the night janitor is making like $110,000 a year, And universities have almost become like a out of control runaway government agency where, money is no object, just keep on blowing it. The other thing too is I met through a mutual friend, a lawyer down in Silicon Valley, who's a patent attorney with one of the leading firms in Silicon Valley. And he's about my age, he's in his 60s as well. And we had supper, a few of us together, and he launched into the demise of the U.S. university system. And he said when he looks at universities now in the U.S., when you graduate through a university degree there, it's like a high school degree. And he said that he has university graduates, even from Ivy League universities, that come into his office in Silicon Valley to patent something. And he says that their application and what they're doing pales in comparison, because they also have a patent office in China. So he spends, I think he said, 1 month every 2 or 3 months in the Chinese office. And he said, we have high school people from China that come in to patent things. And he says, their proposals, their ideas, the way it's articulated is far, far, far superior even to an American who has graduated from an Ivy League university. I will talk about another thing as well that's very important, is that, I mentioned how I said to my friend that, he's never thought about once his university days. And, he phoned me up about, I'd say 4 or 5 months after I brought that up to him. And he actually said, boy, you really messed me up mentally, because I think about it all the time, what you said. And at first I defended university, I defended my degree, I defended the fact it made me the man I am today. But he said, after reflecting on it, you know what, you're 100% right. I've never used the degree, and when I look back at it, the degree is useless. But he did say one thing, and I agree with him. the university degree gets you the interview. Then he said something interesting as well, because he said, you know, I have something that I'll tell you that is exactly what you were talking about. He was the CEO of a software company at the time, and he hired a guy with an MBA. The guy had been there for, I don't know, a couple weeks or something, and he liked to eat in this Mexican restaurant for lunch, and they'd run out of paper for either the printer or else the photocopier. So he said to this guy, I know you're going to that place for lunch, but there's a Staples and Office Depot right next door. Can you just pick up some paper for the, you know, the printer? It's like 3 hours later, he's going by the boardroom, and this MBA guy has 3 different stacks of paper on the boardroom. He has all these senior vice presidents and senior managers there. And my friend pops into the boardroom and goes, what's going on? And the MBA guy proudly says, well, you know, they had like 3 types of paper at Staples, so I bought all 3. Now we're having a board meeting to decide what paper we are going to use. And my friend said, all the people in that boardroom were probably costing $5,000, God knows, $8,000 an hour. And this guy is, we got to convene a meeting. We have to run spreadsheets. We have to do studies. And this is exactly what my professor told me would happen if you stayed in university. And there was a glaring example of it. So my friend basically ended up firing the guy, and he said to me, you're so right, Ron. You know what? I don't think I'll ever hire another MBA in my career because I don't have time to deprogram them. And, you know, it's just amazing. And I guess with my friend, I imparted this thinking about things from a common sense point of view, not just this like automatic response, oh, he has a degree, he's the best hire, he's the best employee. Now, I'll go back in time too. When I first met my friend, he was with IBM in Vancouver, Canada. We used to go for lunch all the time because my business is right downtown. He was a block away. And we were out for lunch, and all of a sudden he looks at his watch. He goes, oh my God, it's 1:30. I got to rush back to the office because New York closes in 3 hours. They're 3 hours ahead, so I got half an hour, and I need like $3 million for my division. And I said, oh, okay, so you're going to have to tell them spreadsheets and profit and loss and why you need it. He says, no, I just have an employee number, and I just tell them what my employee number is, and I'm authorized to a certain amount, and I just get the $3 million in my account the next day in my division. And I said, oh my God, that doesn't teach you business. You don't have to justify it. You know, you can make a shambles of your division and you just get money. Yeah. And, you know, you have to keep in mind too, that back in those days, IBM was revered as the business model to run any business, small or large. And the management style of IBM was taught in every business school, including Harvard MBA school. And I mean, I read about it in financial magazines and financial publications, and it was legendary as the way to run any organization. So at one point in time, I asked my friend to explain the whole management style of IBM because I was fascinated by this. If it's so wonderful, I better incorporate it in my career. Well, he explained it to me, and I basically said to him, oh my God, this is a way to destroy any business. And, you know, his answer was, well, IBM is, at this point in time, one of the most successful, if not the most successful corporation in the world. So yeah, we got to be doing it right. Then I made the argument to him that IBM at that point in time basically had a monopoly. I mean, there were no such things as personal computers, and IBM was supplying these mainframe computers, because that's all they really had, that would fill up like a whole gymnasium. And they had virtually no competition. So my argument to him was, well, IBM has a monopoly. It's almost like the government where they can just increase taxes. IBM can just increase the price of their mainframes and their services, and you have nowhere else to go because they were basically it in the computer world back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And he said, well, no, you know, we're revered our management style. And it was, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 years after that conversation, IBM, basically almost imploded because all of a sudden there was all this competition. And only after their profit went down and they were in trouble did people actually look at the management style. And in Harvard Business School, one semester, Harvard was teaching that you have to emulate the IBM management system. And literally the next semester, they were teaching you that the IBM management system is destructive. And, universities get caught up and don't analyze it. Professors are only academics. Very few have real world experience. And you have to really, in my estimation, analyze what's going on behind the scenes. The end result, people give credit to the end result, but they don't realize what led to the end result. In IBM's situation, it was their monopoly. So no matter how screwed up their management system was, they were incredibly profitable. Now, my friend also phoned me up one day, and he was very frustrated and said, "You know what? I'm looking to hire, software guys, and I can't get anybody. There's nobody out there. And if you find them, they've already had a job and they're getting paid big bucks." And this was in the 90s. And he said, "I'll start them at $200,000, even $300,000 a year." And I said to him, "Well, why don't you you're down in Silicon Valley, why don't you go to Stanford or Berkeley or, any Ivy League university and get these young guys out of computer sciences?" And he said, "Rod, what they teach in computer sciences is 4, 5, 6 years old. That's ancient. That's, like dinosaurs." And he said, once they graduate with their computer sciences degree, they have the same skill set that's required today as somebody you pull off the street, because technology is that fast evolving. So there you go. Computer sciences is useless because it's behind the curve. The professors are teaching stuff that's 5 or 6 years old, not current. Now, I have a relative who's an engineer. And, I got thinking, okay, well, there's got to be some faculties that are, good for university. I mean, obviously medical is. I mean, there's a lot to know, the human anatomy, all the organs, all the diseases, all the problems. I mean, that's a very long process to learn that. But then I thought, well, engineering, because it's quite technical and everything, you need a lot of schooling for that. And when I talked to my relative, he said, no, what they teach in university is useless. And he's quite senior, and he's hiring young universities to university. And the moment he hires somebody, the first thing he says to him is, everything they taught in university, forget it, it's useless. Your real education starts now. And it also brought back memories of an uncle when I was a little boy who was an engineer. And I asked him once, I mean, this before computers and everything, and I said, wow, how do you guys, he was a civil engineer, how do you design bridges, and how do you design high-rises and everything? I said, the mathematics must be mind-boggling, and the time spent. And he said, well, Ron, it's quite simple. We all do the same thing. Now, granted, this was before computers. He says, we go, okay, I think the steel beam that's 1 foot across will do the job. Just to be safe, we'll double it. And he said that is how every building and how every bridge is designed in Canada, pre-computers. So, he was basically saying his university was useless. And he said, if you actually try and figure out, without a computer, all the stresses and strains, let's say on a bridge going across a river, he said you need an army of engineers for a whole year just doing the calculations. So he says the whole engineering field back then, we just say, whatever it takes, double it. Now we're safe. So, here we are today where this society is just worshiping universities. We have neglected the trades. We have taken all our skilled manual jobs, exported them to Asia. And we are a society of white-collar workers that produce nothing. And that's another reason why universities are so destructive. I'll just give you a little mental exercise to think about. What would happen tomorrow in the US or Canada if every senior bureaucrat, now I mean, I have friends who are lawyers and accountants, but nothing against them. They're not the issue. It's the system. If every lawyer was removed, every accountant was removed, every Wall Street financier was removed, all the white collar jobs all of a sudden, and those people disappeared off the planet of the earth. And we only had the plumbers, electricians, the carpenters, the automobile line workers. Well, I make the argument the world would probably be better off and run more efficiently. Now, do the flip side. What would happen if all the people who make everything for us, all the farmers disappeared, the carpenters, the automobile manufacturers, the computer manufacturers, all those people disappeared off the planet of the earth, and all you had left were the white-collar workers? What would happen to this world? And yet, as a society, we keep on taking more and more percentage of the population into white-collar jobs that produce nothing. All they do is take resources that are already in the country, in the economy, and shuffle them and move them around. Nothing is created. And university is basically graduating more and more and more of these people that create spreadsheets, create rules and regulations. It's work for the sake of work with no stated outcome or lofty goal. So I think I'll leave it at that. As always, I welcome your comments. But as I say at the end of all my videos, please do factual comments. Just don't be angry and say, I'm an idiot, I'm a fool. Give me an argument. Give me a good factual argument. I always respect that. Thank you so much for watching.